The World Cup is supposed to make transfers easier, play well, raise your value, and suddenly the biggest clubs come calling. Except for these 7 players, the opposite happened. One is clubless, several are trapped behind huge fees, and one may have had his dream move poisoned by Real Madrid. We'll start in Madrid because Julian Alvarez might be stuck in the strangest transfer deadlock of the summer. Argentina reached another World Cup final and Julian did his part. In the quarter-final against Switzerland, he scored the goal everyone remembered. A ridiculous strike that FIFA's fans later voted the best goal from the quarter-finals and semi-finals. At that point, if he wanted a move, you would think half of Europe would be fighting for him. And they are. That's the problem. Alvarez wants Barcelona. Barcelona want Alvarez. Atletico Madrid absolutely do not want to sell their star striker to Barcelona. And then Real Madrid walked into the story and made everything worse. Before the World Cup, Madrid publicly announced a €150 million bid for Julian. Atletico rejected it. Barcelona sources then reportedly interpreted the offer as more political than practical, basically questioning whether Madrid ever seriously expected Atletico to accept it. That's where the fake Madrid bid theory comes from. We can't prove Madrid never intended to sign him, but whether it was genuine or not, it did something very real. It put €150 million on the board. So now Barca cannot walk in with 100 or 120 million euros and expect Atletico to smile. Atletico's message has become even harder since then. They have publicly insisted they would not sell even at 200 million euros. Julian can want Barcelona all he likes. Right now, Atletico hold every card. And if a World Cup star can be trapped by a price tag, the next one has an even bigger problem. He doesn't have a club at all because James Rodriguez is back on the market. Again. James is 35 now, but Colombia still built so much of their World Cup around him. They topped their group and reached the round of 16, where Switzerland finally knocked them out on penalties. James also moved further into Colombian football history during the tournament. He wasn't 2014 James anymore, but he was still the captain, still the organizer, still the player everyone looked for when Colombia needed control. And then the tournament ended, and so did his club situation. Minnesota United had signed James on a short-term contract through June, with an option to keep him through December. They chose not to use it. By late July, his exit was confirmed and James was a free agent again. That's brutal timing. You have just played another World Cup, you're still one of the biggest names in Colombian football, and instead of coming home to a contract extension, you come home to unemployment. The issue is obvious. Clubs are not judging the name James Rodriguez. They're judging a 35-year-old midfielder, his wages, his physical level, and how many minutes they can realistically build around him. But at least James is free. The next player has buyers. His problem is that Chelsea have made him almost impossible to buy. This is Enzo Fernandez. Enzo's World Cup was messy, but it was memorable. Argentina reached the final, and in the semi-final against England, Enzo scored the equaliser in that wild comeback that sent Argentina through. Then came the other side of him. He was sent off in the final against Spain, which Argentina eventually lost in extra time. Still, nobody came out of that tournament wondering whether Enzo can handle big games. The question is whether anybody wants to pay what Chelsea are asking. Real Madrid have been linked with him forever, but they have ruled out a move this summer. Manchester City are now looking at Enzo as a possible midfield replacement if Rodri leaves for Barcelona. And Chelsea's number? Around £120 million. Guys, that's not a transfer fee. That's a security system. City have money, but even they have already spent heavily this summer. So Enzo is sitting in this bizarre position where elite clubs like him, Chelsea, could theoretically sell him, but the price immediately kills most of the market. And if £120 million can freeze Enzo's future, wait until you see what one World Cup goal did to Benfica's negotiating position. Football fans, this is the deal you don't want to miss. Whether you're hunting for an iconic World Cup jersey or the colours of your favourite club, Goal90 Shop has the perfect pick for you. And right now, everything is a flat 15% off, with free shipping anywhere in the world. So don't wait. Hit the link in the description, head over to Goal90 Shop and grab your favourite jersey today. Meet Andreas Schjelderup. Norway were one of the stories of the World Cup. They knocked out Brazil, reached the quarter-finals for the first time, and then Schjelderup gave England a genuine scare by putting Norway ahead. England eventually came back to win 2-1, but that goal changed how people looked at him. He wasn't just a Benfica prospect anymore, he had scored in a World Cup quarter-final. Tottenham noticed. Spurs have reportedly put roughly £47 million on the table. Benfica's problem is that after the World Cup, Schjelderup suddenly looks more valuable than he did 6 weeks earlier. Their manager has called him fundamental, his release clause is enormous, and Benfica are in no rush to give Tottenham a discount. So the tournament that was supposed to earn Schjelderup a bigger move may actually be the reason Benfica can now demand more money for him. But here's the really cruel part for Norway. Schjelderup isn't even the player whose path out may have been hurt most by another transfer. That would be Antonio Nusa. Nusa was excellent at the World Cup. He became Norway's youngest ever World Cup scorer, produced the breakthrough against Ivory Coast, and was one of the attacking threats Brazil were specifically worried about before Norway knocked them out. By the end of the tournament, the obvious question was, how long can Leipzig really keep him? Then Jan Diomande left. Real Madrid just paid around 125 million euros plus bonuses for Leipzig's other electric young winger. And from Leipzig's point of view, that changes everything. They have already made their monster sale. They have already lost one of the players who made their attack dangerous. Why would they now rush to sell Nusa too? Nusa has denied reports that he formally asked to leave, but clubs have been circling and Leipzig's valuation has been reported around 55 to 60 million euros. Nothing has moved. Sometimes being the second star out the door is the worst place to be, and at least Nusa is still at a Bundesliga club. Azzedine Ounahi came back from his World Cup to something much worse: relegation. Morocco reached the quarter-finals again, and Ounahi produced one of the best individual knockout performances of their run. Against Canada in the round of 16, he scored twice in a 3-0 win. FIFA later picked him among the African stars who lit up the tournament. Then he returned to Girona, who had gone down. That should make the transfer simple, right? World Cup quarter-finalist, proven international, relegated club, player clearly too good for the second tier. Somebody comes in, pays a reasonable fee, everyone moves on, except it still hasn't happened. Barcelona have considered him, Ajax have been in the conversation, Real Madrid have also been mentioned around the situation. Girona are open to offers, and reports in Spain have suggested Ounahi could be available for a relatively manageable fee after relegation. And yet, as of now, there is no new club. Which brings us to the last player, because this one got even closer. Emiliano Martinez actually agreed personal terms for his move, and he still couldn't get it done. Argentina reached the World Cup final, and Emi nearly dragged them across the line. Spain dominated long stretches of that game, but Martinez kept saving them until the 106th minute, when Spain finally found the winner. It was another reminder of what Argentina already knew from 2022. When the tournament gets ugly, Emi can keep you alive. Then Juventus came calling. Martinez wanted the move. Personal terms were reportedly agreed. Aston Villa were prepared to negotiate. This looked like one of those transfers where the only thing left was everybody sitting around a table and finding the number. Instead, Juventus walked away. Their conclusion was simple: the total package cost too much. Transfer fee, salary, everything added together. Juventus informed Villa they were no longer proceeding with the deal. So after another World Cup final, after agreeing terms with one of Europe's biggest clubs, Martinez is still an Aston Villa player. And that might be the theme of this entire list. A good World Cup doesn't always make your transfer easier. Sometimes it raises your fee. Sometimes it gives your club more confidence to say no. Sometimes another player leaves first. And sometimes, even when the player and the new club agree, the numbers still kill it. So which of these 7 actually gets his move before the window closes? And which one do you think is still sitting in exactly the same place on deadline day? Drop it in the comments, hit like, subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next one.